G'day, g'day. My name's Alan Gamble. Welcome to another episode of Aussie Box Office Charts. Big exciting week this week, so let's dive in. So the big story is number 1 and 2. Zootopia 2 holds top spot in its second week of release, dropping just 28% for a current total of just over $11.6 million, bringing in another $4.1 million this weekend, which beat out what I expected to be number 1, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 with its $3.7 million opening. We'll dive more into the opening a bit later, but that is a lot lower than I expected. Everywhere else in the world, US domestic and international markets, Five Nights at Freddy's is the number 1 movie. Not in Australia. So the Five Nights at Freddy's audience in Australia is just, it's about 40% lower than Five Nights at Freddy's from 2023's opening. Still one of the biggest horror openings of the year, so it's not a complete, flop, but it brought in $3.7 million in its opening week. Dropping down the order to number 3, dropping another 50% in its third week of release, was Wicked for Good. That's not a good sign for that, but we'll dive more into that a bit later. But in its third week of release, it brought in another $2.5 million for a current total of $24.9 million, which is a good number for 2025. André Rieu's 2025 Christmas concert, as always, pops up into the chart at number 4 with $650,000, as always. And rounding out the top 5 is Nuremberg. I expected a different opening. I expected Eternity to land this spot, but apparently Nuremberg came in with $653,000 for a current total of $800,000 in its opening week, rounding out the top 5. So let's move on to 6 through 10. At number 6, we have Jujutsu Kaisen Execution, opening with $616,000, another decently performing anime. Now, that's a smaller anime compared to Demon Slayer and Chainsaw Man, which had really big performances in Australia. And it's still a bit off the pace of Jujutsu Kaisen 0 from 2022, which opened to around $900,000. But still, as far as anime goes in 2025, it's been a great year, so they can't complain too much. At number 7, we have Dhurandhar with $615,000. That's a Hindi language action thriller out of India about an Indian spy sent in to infiltrate the Karachi mafia in Pakistan. At number 8, we have one that I expected to do a significantly better than it did, with Eternity opening at $380,000 for a current total of $480,000. At number 9, we have Now You See Me, Now You Don't, dropping another 50% in its fourth week of release, with another $360,000 for a current total of $5.7 million. And rounding out the top 10, we have Predator Badlands, with another $100,000, its fifth week in release, dropping 62% for a current total of $5.9 million. So, before we move on and dive into some charts, one thing I've got to mention, as I said, we do have a new top 5 horror opener with Five Nights at Freddy's. Hasn't beaten The Conjuring Last Rites with its $4.8 million, but $3.7 million does put it ahead of Weapons with $2.8 million. It puts it ahead of 28 Days Later at $2.5 million, and puts it ahead of Nosferatu at $2.3 million. It also knocks out of the top 5 horror openings Final Destination Bloodlines. So that's how horror looks for 2025 openings in Australia. Alright, charts roundup time. So we'll start off with the big headline, Five Nights at Freddy's. Here is the openings of Five Nights at Freddy's versus Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Pretty clear indication. Now, Five Nights at Freddy's opened to $6.1 million, and I was kind of expecting Five Nights at Freddy's to open to more than that. The fact that it didn't, the fact that it opened to around 40% less than the original, I don't know why Australia is different for this one. Whether the audience has just dried up, whether it's moved on, whether they got all their chicken jockeys out at the start of the year with Minecraft, I don't know. Everywhere else in the world, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is the number 1 movie. So Australia is just kind of special. Maybe we've got an audience that sees it and goes, it's not very good. I've heard mixed reports. I've heard some pretty terrible things. I've heard some, it's terrible, but fans might like it. But if we don't have the fan base, they're not going to rock up to see it. Let's move over to Wicked. So this is the first 3 weeks of Wicked versus Wicked for Good. Week 1, you can see Wicked for Good had a pretty decent lead over the first Wicked. Weekend 2, that gross was a little bit closer and it had started to make its lead. So Wicked held better. And it's continuing to hold better as we move into week 3, where Wicked for Good is now behind where Wicked was in its third week of release in terms of total domestic Australian gross. So if that trend continues, and I expect it will, Wicked for Good is not going to get up to $48 million that it needs to beat Wicked at the total domestic box office for musicals. Where is it going to end up? I mean, it's still brought in like $24.9 million. So it's going to end up, 20, 30, maybe low 30s, which is still a good number, but it's not the mind-blowing $48 million that the first Wicked brought in. We'll take a quick look at the opening weekends of animes. So this is just the animes, just to include Jujutsu Kaisen Execution. You can see right down there, it's not the lowest of the low, but it's also not mind-blowingly high. So it's an anime, but it's a different anime. It is well behind the 2022 Jujutsu Kaisen 0, and it is well off the pace of Demon Slayers and the Chainsaw Mans, but it's okay. It's doing fine. It's good year for anime, no matter how you shake a stick. The last thing we'll have a quick look at is just André Rieu and the musical concert event movies, with André Rieu's new movie or new concert event releasing. It opened to $650,000, which puts it down the bottom, which is not good for Mr. Rieu and his orchestra, but it's still, it's not dire. It's well off the pace of his highs of 1.4 and $1.2 million. But yeah, he would like this number to be higher, but it's fairly consistent with his other recent concert event movies. Looking at the 2025 top 10 at the Australian box office, so everything released in calendar year 2025, we have some more movement on this chart thanks to Wicked for Good, moving up a couple of spots to number 6 with $24.96 million, dropping Superman with its $24.9 million down, and Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning also gets knocked down with its $23.6 million. Fantastic Four, The First Steps, and Paddington in Peru stick around. We'll see how they hold up, and can they hold off Zootopia 2? We will soon find out over coming weeks. Moving on to upcoming releases. In wide release, December 11th, we have Pets on a Train, a French animated movie that didn't do super well in the US market, so we'll see what it does here. We also have Ella McKay, a comedy drama from writer-director James L. Brooks, about a young politician preparing to take over from her mentor, starring Emma Macquarie, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Woody Harrelson. We have Silent Night, Deadly Night, a Christmas horror slasher remake of the 1984 movie with the same name, from writer-director Mike P. Nelson and starring Rowan Campbell, Rudy Modine, and David Tomlinson. In limited release, so check your smaller and indie cinemas, we have Kiss Kisko Pyar Karun 2, I hope I got that right, a Hindi language romantic comedy out of India. We also have The Carpenter's Son, a Jesus paranormal-based horror movie starring Nicolas Cage. It's apparently quite bad, but if that's your jam, you'll know based on that description already. And finally, we have Abhimanyu Chapter 1, a social thriller out of India that is showing in a few different languages, so you can catch it how you choose. Moving on to streaming, we have Man vs. Baby. That's an easy fight. The man should win. A new comedy series starring Rowan Atkinson on Netflix that releases on December 11th. We have Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery. After its short, limited theatrical run, the third Knives Out movie is releasing on Netflix. You can find it on December 12th. In returning series, we have Percy Jackson and the Olympians returning for its second season, 2 years after the first season, with another 8 episodes, which people have probably forgotten about. I know people that are a fan of this IP and this book really are massive fans, like old school Harry Potter style fans. So I'm sure most of the fans will have rewatched season 1 right before season 2, but you can catch it on Disney Plus on the 11th of December. We also have Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft, returning for its second season on Netflix on December 12th. And Record of Ragnarok returns for its third season on Netflix on December 10th. So with 5 movies this week, let's jump into what I watched for the Visitors and Guests Challenge. First up was a small indie light sci-fi movie, 40 Acres from 2025, directed by R.T. Thorne and starring Danielle Deadwyler, Kateem O'Connor and Michael Greyes. A small light sci-fi post-apocalypse set movie that is set in a future where the eco-chain has broken down and Earth is suffering mass starvations as crops and farms die out and people are trying to fight over and take what's left. It was an interesting little movie that does force some mental leeway in the universe that they've created in order for it to work, but if you go with the flow and don't ask too many questions, you have an interesting little gem of a movie from 2025 that most people are probably going to miss. Next up was a rewatch of 2025's Black Bag, directed by Steven Soderbergh and starring Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender. A small-scale spy thriller that starts and ends with a dinner party with guests. This was a recap rewatch of a movie that I liked when I originally saw it at the cinemas much earlier in the year. So this was still great on rewatch. Such a tight little movie, not a minute wasted, great chemistry, great writing, great pace, great all round. Next was another rewatch of an earlier 2025 release with Sinners, written and directed by Ryan Coogler, starring Michael B. Jordan, Haley Seinfeld, and Miles Canton. Set in the 1932 Mississippi Delta, and the opening of a new club with some unwanted guests that would like to join. Another recap rewatch since I saw Sinners back in March, and it's still great. I'm glad I rewatched it pre-award season, as it does deserve a lot of the praise it's getting. That said, there are other great movies from this year, so it doesn't have to win every award, guys. But it's still a great movie. Moving on to my first Christmas movie of the year with Happiest Season from 2020, directed by Claire Duvall, starring Kirsten Stewart, Mackenzie Davies, Alison Brie, Dan Levy and Aubrey Plaza. Absolutely stacked cast, it's kind of nuts. Giving us a classic trope of visiting a family over Christmas, but we have to pretend that they're not dating, but this time with a queer twist. I had fun with this one. It has more heart than movies of its type often do. That said, part of my brain did want Kirsten Stewart's character to end up with Aubrey Plaza's character, but it did go to the more traditional path in the end. Finally, was another 2025 catch-up movie of Riff Raff, directed by Dito Montelio, starring Ed Harris, Jennifer Coolidge, Gabrielle Union, Lewis Pullman, and Bill Murray. A retired hitman's holiday is tossed into disarray when his ex-wife and son arrive unannounced when they're on the run. I really wanted to like this one more than I did. It has a lot of ingredients I normally like in movies. Small casts, almost a single location bottle movies, tight crime drama, but it just didn't land for me the way I wanted, which was disappointing. Fairly simple free slate one this week. This week is just favourite challenge of 2025. So basically, if there was anything done for any week previous, we can just redo it with any movie we want, as long as it meets one of the previous challenges. So let's look at my shortlist, which has a few things like Breathless and Sting, a lot of 2025 catch-up, Oh Hi, Eddington, Highest to Lowest, Epheus, Summer of 69, some 2025 rewatches like K-pop and Relay. We've got Surat and Nuremberg, and yeah, we've got a lot to see. We'll see how we go. And that is it for me this week. Not a lot on the weekend for me, as I'm going to keep a low profile, burning a lot of my 2025 catch-up. Got a lot of movies to get through before the end of the year. But we will look into the small animated movie, or this small horror movie that we've got coming out, to see if they can make a dent in Zootopia 2, Five Nights at Freddy's, or Wicked 2. I doubt it, but we will see next week. But no theatrical releases for me this week, unless I catch something, one of the older ones, if I get time. But that's it. Have a good one. Watch more movies. I'll see you next week. Bye.